Hi, sixth graders. Today we're doing our actually last lesson in this unit, and it is going to be looking at bar graphs and circle graphs and using the idea of percent to kind of connect something that we see often in real life. Graphs are all over the place. They're nonfiction text. You see them just in real life all over the place. They're a great way to depict information. So it's really it's really important that we understand how to read a bar graph, how to read a circle graph, how they compare to each other, how we can get information from them. So it's going to be a really good lesson. So it says that the bar graph and the circle graph show data about Sahil's postcard collection. So first thing you know about a graph is that you need to read all the information on it so you understand what it's about. We have a bar graph that's Sahil's postcards from the United States by region. So here's the number of postcards. First thing I notice is that it's jumping by fours. So 0, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, it's jumping by fours. She gets postcards from, actually, I don't know if Sahil is a boy or a girl. I'm going to go with she. But she gets some from the Northeast, the Southeast, a ton from the Midwest, some from the Southwest, and some from the West. Those are the regions. And then you have the same graph just depicted in a different way. So this is a circle graph, what's called a pie graph, because it looks like a pie, instead of depicted with the bars. But this is showing the same information. You'll even notice that the colors for the Midwest are green on both of them. The Southeast are orange on both of them. You can kind of get the idea there, but it's a good way to compare the information. One of the big things to notice too is that in order to find the total, we don't know how many postcards Sahil has by looking at the circle graph. We just know that this whole circle represents 100% of what she has. This is a really good way to look at percent. But we don't know how much is in each one unless we compare it to the bar graph, because the bar graph has the actual numbers. The Midwest is 48. So 48 postcards is what this represents, but we would not know that unless we looked at this bar graph. All right, so let's do some of the problems. Number 1 says, what's the ratio of cards from the Northeast to cards from the West? So because we're looking at numbers, I'm not really going to be able to use the circle graph here. So Northeast to the West. So Northeast is 4. And then, so that's going to go first. And then the West is 8. So the ratio from Northeast to West is 4 to 8. If you wanted to simplify that ratio, you could. 4 to 8 is the same as half, or 1 to 2, but I'm just going to leave it as 4 to 8. What is the ratio of cards from the West to the Northeast? Those are the ones we just did, but it switched them. So now the ratio is 8 to 4. Remember, the first one they list is always the first number that should be in your ratio. Now we're going to use the circle graph. Are more or fewer than 50% of Sahil's cards from the Midwest? Well, on a circle graph, I know that the halfway point would be 50%. So are more or less than 50% from the Midwest? The Midwest is this one in green. I can tell very easily that more than 50% are from the Midwest, because 50% would be right here, and there's extra green after that, so it's more than 50%. Are more or fewer than 25% of Sahil's cards from the Southwest? Well, 25%, here I should make a little note that 50 is like half, and that 25% is like 1/4, 1/4, if you're thinking of money, from the Southwest. Okay, so Southwest is this red color, and this red color looks smaller. So I'm going to write fewer than a fourth, because a fourth would be cut right here and then right here. So 1/4 is actually the red one and the blue one together. So the red is definitely smaller than that, so it'd be fewer. Now the next question says, how could you check your answers to problems 3 and 4, the ones we just did, by using the bar graph? Well, if we did not have this information here, if we didn't have the picture, it would be a lot trickier to be able to tell if more or less was 50% or 25%. We would have to actually crunch some numbers. So if we wanted to use the bar graph for number 3, first you would have to figure out, well, what is 50% of all the cards? Well, I don't know how many cards there are till I add them up. So I need to add them up. I have 4 8, 48, 12, and 8. So I need to add to find my total. 4 plus 8 is 12, plus 48 more is 60, plus 12 more is 72, plus 8 more is 80. So there's 80 cards total. And I'm just going to use a little bit of, I'm maybe just going to do this without writing a bunch down here, but if I wanted to figure out 50% of her cards and the total was 80, well, 50 is half, remember? So what's half of 80? Half of 80 is 40. So I'm going to say half of the cards would be 80. And so not 80, oh my gosh, the total is 80. Half would be 40. And so what about the Midwest? Well, the Midwest was 48. So is 48 more or less than 40? Well, it's more, okay? So that's why we had more for the first one. Now on the second one, it was 25%. What's 25% or 1/4 of 80? Well, 1/4 of 80, this is such an easy number. Again, I can do this in my head. Splitting it into 4 equal parts, each one would be 20. 20, 40, 60, 80. So 1/4 would just be 20. And from the Southwest is 12. So if 25% is 12, or 1/4 of the cards would be 20, and Southwest is only 12, then Southwest is fewer than 1/4, or fewer than 25%. So that's how you could use the bar graph. Obviously, in this example, the picture is way easier, or not the picture, the circle graph is way easier to use when you're trying to figure out percents. But if you want actual hard numbers, then the bar graph is easier. So now we have a little bit of different information. We have Isabel has a collection of souvenirs from U.S. presidential elections. The graphs below show the kinds of souvenirs she collected and the dates of the presidential elections for her souvenirs. So here's her graph. That's a bar graph. She has buttons, and I'm going to go ahead and put the total at the top. She has 20 buttons, bumper stickers. She has, oh, I forgot to count what this is skipping by. Skip counting by 2. So if this lands in the middle, it's between 6 and 8, which would be 7. Pens, again, it's in the middle of 14 and 16, which would be 15. Posters, it's right at 2. And other could be any other souvenirs that were not buttons or bumper stickers or pens or posters. And she has 6. So if I want to find her total, I'm just going to do this. I'm assuming I'm going to need the total later. Might as well figure it out now. I will add 20 plus 7, which is 27, plus 15 more. So 27 plus 10 more would be 37. 5 more would be 42. Plus 2 more would be 44. And then plus 6 more would be 50. Cool. So the total souvenirs is 50. Then when I look at her pie graph or her circle graph, it's actually different. The colors don't really match up perfectly like they did on the last one. So on our last example, these were showing the same information, just 2 different ways. Both of them were showing the postcards by region. But this time they're showing 2 different things. The bar graph is about what kind of souvenirs she got and how many. And the circle graph is showing what year she got each of her souvenirs. So this does not tell you what kind of souvenir she has. This tells you how many souvenirs she has from the year 2008. What percent of her souvenirs came from 2004. So these are showing 2 different things. They're both about the souvenirs, but it's 2 different topics. Okay? This is about her type of souvenir or what kind, and this is about the year they came from. Okay, so we're going to solve and write whether we use the bar graph, the circle graph, or if we needed to use information from both of them to get our answer. So number 6 says, what percent of Isabel's souvenirs are buttons? Well, if I'm going to be talking about the type, if she has buttons, I can't figure that out from the circle graph. This does not tell me anything about buttons, okay? So I have to use the bar graph. What percent are buttons? Well, she has 20 buttons, but that's not a percent. So some kids might go, oh, I need the circle graph because that tells me the percent, but this does not tell you anything about buttons. It will not help us. So how can we figure out the percent from the information here? Well, I know that percent is all about part to whole, or in other words, part to total. And in a percent, it's always about a total of 100, and we don't know the percent. So we're going to put X out of 100. But we do know that her buttons, she has 20 of them, that's the part, and the total of all her souvenirs is 50. Now, if I want my math to be a little bit easier, I'm going to simplify this fraction, and I'm going to rewrite it as 2/5. That will make my math easier when I go to cross multiply. So I am going to cross multiply, and I'm going to multiply 100 times 2 and say that's equal to x times 5. In other words, 5x. So we have 200 equals 5x, so 5 times something equals 200. In order to make this x isolated, I'm going to divide it by 5, because right now it's being multiplied by 5. So I can also divide by 5 with my 200 to get my final answer. So x is all alone, and then 200 divided by 5 is 40. I can do that in my head. If you can't do that in your head, then just do 200 divided by 5 off to the side. But we end up with 40. So what percent of her souvenirs are buttons? 40%. And we did that because we found out that 20 of her buttons out of a total of 50, that's the same as 2/5, we did a proportion with what percent out of 100. And X was 40, which means 40%. So the second blank is telling whether we use the bar graph, circle graph, or both. We only used the bar graph. We did not use the circle graph because it did not help us figure out anything with the buttons. Number 7, what percent of Isabel's souvenirs are from elections in 2000 or later? Well, the bar graph is not going to help us because it does not tell us anything about the year. We have to use the circle graph. In fact, I'm going to answer that right now. The circle graph is what will help us answer this. What percent of her souvenirs are from 2000 or later? So, 2000 or later. Before 1996? That's not 2000 or later. 1996? That's not 2000 or later. 2000? Ooh, this is true. So we have 20% right here. 2004? Yeah, that's the year 2000 or later. So that's another 20%. And 2008, yes, that's also the year 2000 or later. So basically, we took these 3 categories, the blue, the yellow, and the green. They were all the year 2000 or later. We're going to add up their percent, and it's a total of 70%. So 70% of her souvenirs are from the year 2000 or later, which means 30% are from before that, which is exactly what our graph shows us. Number 8. How many of her souvenirs are from the 2008 collection? Well, I can tell that I'm going to need to use the circle graph because that's about the year. But when it asks me how many, that's a specific number. I have no idea how many that is until I get a total. And I can't do the total unless I'm looking at my bar graph. Remember when we found our bar graph total? It was by adding up all of those bars. So I actually need information from both these graphs. I need the total, and then I also need this number of what the percent is in 2008. So how I'm going to solve this is just like this. I'm going to take my souvenirs from 2008, which is 30%, so 30 out of 100, and we're going to say how many souvenirs was that? Well, the total souvenirs was 50, so I'm going to put my total on the bottom because 100% is also my total. And I don't know what percent, or not percent, I don't know what number of souvenirs that is. That's where my X is. So to make my math a little bit easier, I'm going to rewrite this as 3/10 because I know that 30 over 100 is the same thing as 3 over 10. So this got a little bit messy. Maybe I'll rewrite it over here. 3/10 equals x over 50. There we go. So if I cross multiply, I get 10x equals 3 times 50. So what is 3 times 50? 150. I ran out of room again. Oh my gosh, I just need to move this up here. Okay, so 10x equals 3 times 50. There we go. Okay, so 10x equals 150. And then I need to isolate the x. So I will divide by 10 instead of multiplying by 10. And I end up with x equals 150 divided by 10. And when you divide something by 10, it's just saying you're moving that decimal place to the left one time. So this becomes 15. So x equals 15. How many souvenirs are from the 2008 collection? 15 souvenirs. Okay, so we had to use both graphs to solve that. And it ended up being 15 souvenirs. All right, our last question for this lesson, I know this lesson went really quick, is Hector says that the graphs make it clear that 6 of the buttons must be from the 2008 collection. Do you agree with this? Well, let's talk about it. So he says that in 2008, there must have been 6 buttons. Okay, well, I would argue that we don't really know. I don't agree with him because, let me write it out as I'm explaining it. I would say no because we don't know what year each button came from. So I guess it's possible that he's right. Maybe those, maybe 6 of the buttons were from 2008, but we don't actually know because this 2008, 30% of all these souvenirs were from 2008, but maybe that was bumper stickers and posters, or maybe it was all pens. Like, we don't know. All this tells us is the year of the coin. It does not necessarily tell us that they were buttons or not.